In the 2nd century of the Common Era, the Roman Empire was the most powerful political entity the world had ever seen. Its legions had marched from the Atlantic coast of Britain to the banks of the Euphrates. Its roads connected 30 million square kilometers of territory in a network so precisely engineered that travel times between provincial capitals had not been significantly improved upon until the invention of the railway. Its law governed dozens of languages and hundreds of cultures and thousands of local traditions that the Roman administrative genius had absorbed, organized, and redirected toward the maintenance of the largest and most durable empire in the history of the Western world. Its legions were the instrument of all of it. The Roman legion, 30 cohorts, approximately 5,000 fighting men, organized in the most sophisticated combined arms structure the ancient world had produced, was not merely a military unit. It was a civilization in miniature. It built its own roads and its own bridges and its own fortifications. It carried its own engineering equipment and its own field medical facilities and its own administrative infrastructure. It could march 20 miles in full equipment, and then at the end of the march construct a fortified camp from scratch before sundown. It could fight in formation against cavalry, against infantry, against the fortified walls of defended cities, against the guerrilla tactics of peoples who refused the pitched battle that Roman military doctrine was designed to win. The legions were numbered. Each number represented a unit with a history, a lineage of campaigns and commanders and battles and honors that stretched back, in the oldest cases, to the armies of the late Republic. The number was not merely administrative, it was identity. Men who served in a legion identified with it the way that later soldiers would identify with a regiment or a division, with the specific combination of pride and loyalty and shared experience that military life produces when it is sustained over years and reinforced by the institutional traditions of unit history. And then, at some point in the 2nd century CE, one of those numbers disappeared. Legio IX Hispana, the 9th Legion, one of the oldest and most distinguished units in the Roman military establishment. A legion that had fought in the conquest of Britain under the Emperor Claudius in 43 CE. That had been stationed at the great legionary fortress of Agricola in northern Britain, the fortress that would eventually become the city of York. That had been involved in the suppression of Boudicca's revolt in 62-61 CE, that had marched and fought and built and bled across 50 years of Roman Britain's most violent and consequential decades. Simply vanished from the historical record. No battle is recorded at which it was destroyed. No official disbandment is documented. No transfer to another province with its history clearly traced. It was there, and then it was not. The disappearance of the 9th Legion is one of the oldest and most persistent mysteries in the history of Roman Britain, a mystery whose solution has been debated, proposed, rejected, revised, and debated again by generations of historians and archaeologists and novelists and filmmakers who found in the unanswered question something that the answered questions of history cannot provide: the specific, productive uncertainty of a story whose ending has not yet been written. What happened to the 9th Legion? Where did 5,000 Roman soldiers go? Did they march north into the unconquered territories of Caledonia, the land beyond Hadrian's Wall? The land the Romans never fully controlled, the land of the fierce northern tribes who had defeated every Roman advance and who would never be brought fully within the empire's borders and simply never come back. Did they face a catastrophic defeat so complete, so embarrassing, so devastating to Roman military pride that the imperial administration chose to erase it from the official record rather than acknowledge it? Were they transferred to another theater of operations, to the Parthian frontier, to the troubled provinces of the East, to one of the other flashpoints of the 2nd century empire, and simply absorbed into the general military history of another region, their distinctively British history lost in the administrative shuffle? Or is there a more extraordinary answer? The question has been asked for nearly 2,000 years. The answer, or what we can reconstruct of it from the fragmentary, ambiguous, and passionately contested evidence that survives, is a story of empire, of overreach, of military catastrophe, of institutional denial, of the specific cruelty that ancient warfare visited on the defeated, and possibly possibly of something even stranger. The story begins not with the disappearance, but with the world that made the Ninth Legion possible, the world of Roman Britain. The Ninth Legion was old, not old in the way that the ancient world sometimes used the word for military units, as a honorific applied to recently constituted forces, claiming the traditions of predecessor units. Old in the sense that its continuous institutional history stretched back to the upheavals of the late Roman Republic, to the armies of Julius Caesar and the civil wars that followed his assassination, to the specific military and political crucible of the 1st century BCE that forged the professional Roman army from the conscript forces of the Republican tradition, the earliest clear attestation of the Ninth Legion. The first documentary evidence that places a unit of this number, an name in a specific historical context, connects it to the army of Julius Caesar. A legion numbered 9 served in Caesar's Gallic campaigns of the 50s BCE and in the subsequent civil war against Pompey, fighting at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where Caesar's victory over the Pompeian forces effectively decided the civil war's outcome. The men who fought at Pharsalus under the Ninth Siegel were not the men who would eventually march into Britain a century later. The Roman military system of 20-year service terms meant that the legion's membership turned over completely, multiple times across any significant span of years, but the institutional identity persisted. The eagle persisted. Number persisted. The honors and the history accumulated after Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE and the renewed civil wars that followed. The Ninth passed through the military organizations of the triumvirs before eventually becoming part of the professional Augustan army, the reformed military establishment that the first emperor created from the chaos of the Civil War period by establishing the permanent professional legions with fixed bases, regular pay, and the pension system of land grants or cash payments that gave soldiers a material stake in the system they defended. Under Augustus, the Ninth was stationed in the Iberian Peninsula in Hispania, the Roman name for the peninsula. That gives the legion its cognomen, Hispana, the distinguishing addition to its number that became its identity. The Hispana designation reflects not the legion's origin. It was not recruited in Hispania in any systematic sense, but its long association with the province and the pacification campaigns that the early Augustan period required to complete Roman control of the peninsula's resistant northern populations. It was in Hispania that the Ninth's institutional character was formed in the early imperial period. The campaigns against the Cantabrians, the mountain people of northern Spain, whose resistance to Roman authority was sufficiently fierce and sufficiently prolonged that Augustus himself took the field against them. The only time in his long reign that he personally commanded troops in a campaign, tested the Ninth alongside other legions in the specific kind of warfare that the mountains of northern Spain demanded. This was not the pitched battle on open ground that Roman tactical doctrine was optimized for. It was the grinding, attritional combat of rough terrain, of ambush and counter-ambush, of fortified mountain positions that had to be taken by direct assault, of an enemy that would not submit even when every logical calculation of military power argued for submission. The Ninth learned in Hispania the lessons that Britain would require: mountain warfare, the psychology of unconquered peoples, the specific military disciplines required when the enemy refuses to fight on terms that favor Roman advantages, the endurance to prosecute a campaign that does not resolve quickly or cleanly, but drags through seasons and years with the relentless pressure that eventually produces either submission or evacuation. When the Emperor Claudius decided, in 43 CE, to complete the conquest of Britain that Julius Caesar had begun and abandoned a century earlier to finish what the great man had started, to add a new province to the empire and a triumph to his own limited military prestige, the Ninth was among the 4 legions chosen for the invasion. The crossing of the Channel. The invasion force of roughly 40,000 men and ships that the North Sea's unpredictable weather made gamble even for experienced sailors was itself the first test of the force that would conquer Britain. The Channel was not the Mediterranean. The tides were different, the weather was different, the currents were different. The Roman naval tradition, formidable in the enclosed seas of the Mediterranean world, was less comfortable in the open Atlantic waters. They crossed, they landed, they fought their way through the initial resistance of the British. Tribes under Caratacus and Togodumnus, the fierce battles at the crossing of the Medway and the Thames that the ancient sources record as hard-fought and consequential.